Messianics Podcast, a podcast about all things Messianic Judaism. Each episode, we will be sharing our opinions as we tackle some of the biggest issues in Messianic Judaism. Now, here's your hosts, Rabbis Eric, David, Jonathan, and Toby.
Welcome to the podcast. Today we want to discuss something that's been on all of our hearts as Messianic leaders and on the hearts of almost every Messianic leader that I know, and that is the growth of the movement. The Messianic movement has grown dramatically since I became a part of it way back 30-something years ago. And there are more congregations around the country now than by far than there were. At that time, I think in Florida, there's some almost 40 congregations in just the state of Florida, not including those in Alabama and Georgia and other places. But there are a lot of cities and towns that still don't have a Messianic community. And in our minds, in our thoughts, in our hearts, we would like to see a Messianic community in every community, somewhere where people could go and worship Jew and non-Jew together, and in unity, according to the way we view the scriptures in that direction. And so we're going to talk about those things. Now, I started 6 congregations across the Gulf Coast over the years, including the one in Pensacola. Rabbi David started the congregation in Daphne, and so we've been through some of the startup things. I can tell you that things are vastly different today than they were when we started Bridam. We actually started Bridam in a church fellowship hall, church sanctuary, and then ultimately a church fellowship hall. And we were using one of those small karaoke machines for
multiple reasons. One is the 6-Day War
sound system at the time, and we had printed our own Siddurim. We did worship to whatever tapes, because back then it was still cassette tapes.
Woo! Make your mixtape for worship each week.
That's right. We had to make a mixtape for worship each week. We had the best worship leaders money could buy when we began. One, it might be Paul Wilbur and Ted Pierce and Jonathan Sattel and others. And so it was a very different environment than what is today with the technology and the things we have available. Worship videos and different things that are available now, but the basic need issue is the same regardless of technology and advancement, and even the fact that when we came into Pensacola and said we were starting a Messianic congregation, most people had no idea what that was. That is not really the case today.
Yeah, there's a significant difference in even from when we planted CMC in 2011, there's been a significant difference and change in that regard, because like when we started, because Danielle and I were with you and helped you with starting Bridam way back when, and when Bridam was started, there was a church that let you use space, and it was like a Sunday school chapel kind of a thing, yeah. But there was no audio, there was no anything set up. So you guys brought in, like you said, the karaoke type machine, set it all up. Now, like most congregations, most Messianic congregations being planted, typically there's an avenue for churches, and because more churches know what Messianic Judaism is now, my experience has been that there are more churches that are willing to open up legitimate space to you that already has equipment and will let you use the equipment. Some of them, like when we were with the Rosenbergs in New York, and we helped start a congregation in Manhattan, the church that let us use their building, we used their sanctuary, and they let us use all of their AV equipment, and they actually had one of their tech staff members run the audio and stuff for us every week. And they paid for that. Like, now it's not always going to be that case where they're going to pay for it all. They may charge you for it, they may whatever, but it's vastly different now.
It's much more open to co-sharing facilities. And it's interesting now that with the technology and things that are available, that it's easier to do that kind of thing than it was when we started. And now you have the internet, you have social media and things like that to let people know that you're starting something.
Yeah.
When we started Bridom, we had the newspaper.
And word of mouth.
And that was it. So there's a lot of differences, but one of the things that unfortunately remains the same is that there isn't a lot of support coming from either the IMCS or the MJAA, and I'm not saying that to bash them, because the organizations are still in this growth mode. We're still a young organization, young movement overall. So budget restrictions are involved in that, and we aren't so many congregations yet that there's like, if you're in the Southern Baptist Church, there's thousands of congregations all joining together to give a little bit of money for home missions work or foreign missions work and so on. The IMCS and the UMJC and so on don't have thousands of congregations that can each give $100 and make a significant contribution. So there isn't those financial resources available for assistance in providing a salary for a new rabbi or rental for facilities and so on. So that battle still remains, while some of the things that we dealt with are no longer, we're not so unknown now that every conversation has to begin with explaining who you are and who you're not, and then going from there. In most cases, when you go to a community to start a work and you talk to somebody about a Messianic Jewish congregation, at least a good percentage of the people know what that is, and things have changed in that way. But I would still like to see things happen to where there is a financial backing available for that, as well as, and there are some that have done this. Sam Nadler has seminars he does
for
on congregation planting, how to plant a congregation, what to do, what not to do, those things. The IMCS has some resource they do. The union is doing a conference this year for young leaders and older leaders who are wanting to start new congregations. So the conversation is being had, and there is a transition toward providing resources and things. Matter of fact, just yesterday I got a phone call from a congregation in South Florida that the leader passed away, and they asked me if I would come down and help them to realign and kind of vision cast and figure out where do we go from here in that congregation. And although it's not a brand new congregation, it's in a real way,
there's a replant going on.
It's a replanting and a reestablishment of what's going on to go, and having resources. And ultimately, I would love to see...
Is this an alliance congregation?
I don't know if I don't think it's aligned with either of the organizations. It's an independent congregation that's down there. But what I would love to see is not only the resources, but in many denominations, many organizations, they actually have somebody that is their planting director, coordinator, that goes around to the new works, encourages the leaders, shares with them, helps establish a vision for the congregation, because every congregation is unique in their community.
You bring up an interesting point with in the denominational church world, especially your larger denominations. Yet you actually have pastors that's their role, is to go and support with plants. But one of the things I find really intriguing that I think is something the movement could learn from, I don't know that we have the resources yet to make it a thing, but it's something that the movement as a whole could learn from, is in your major denominations, you actually have pastors that their sole job as a pastor in that denomination is planting congregations, and they'll go out and they'll do the work to plant the congregation. And they do this over and over again. They do the work to plant a congregation, and then they bring in leaders or raise up leaders who will take that congregation over, and they're there for maybe 2 years, 3 years, and then they transition to the next plant. But you also have leaders, pastors, that their sole purpose is to fill in as interim pastors when you have somebody that dies, when you have somebody that needs a sabbatical sabbatical or has major health issues, or somebody that has a moral failure and has to step away from the pulpit or whatever, that they're pastors with the denomination, but their role is interim pastor, and they will come in and serve for however long is necessary as an interim until a new pastor is brought in there or raised up there or what have you. Right. I think the movement could gain from having, so like the union has Rabbi Russ Resnick, who's the rabbinic council, and he's great. He's, as a matter of fact, he's phenomenal for, his role is to be there for the rabbis and the leaders in the UMJC. With the IMCS, you have Joel Lieberman and a few others that are very active when you have stuff going on that you can reach out to and talk with and what have you. But I'm thinking like grander scheme, having people who have the ability, have the knowledge and the experience to help with these areas.
Right, and there
phenomenal.
are people within our movement, and one that comes to mind, and I hope he doesn't mind me mentioning his name because he hasn't put his name in the hat for anything like this, but David Rosenberg, who has retired from his congregation, turned it over. He's in Chicago now attending his son's congregation. But he is a vast well of knowledge and experience that could be employed. And when I say employed, not necessarily given a job with a paycheck, although ultimately that would be wonderful to be able to do something like that. But employed as in sent to areas where something is needed because he has the experience, the knowledge, and all that to be able to hold together something, especially if there's a crisis caused by the passing of a leader or moral failure or just a sudden move. So many Messianic leaders have to do two jobs in order to keep going. And in our society, being transient in jobs is a big deal where, suddenly you're told, okay, your job is moving to California and you have the choice. Do I pay for, am I able to support my family or do I stay at this congregation? And pray prayerfully about it, but sometimes it means transferring to a different location and having experienced leaders that could go in and be applied in that way would be dramatically helpful to things, and especially in starting new congregations. In Mobile, when I lived there and we were at Tree of Life, there was a large Baptist church, Cottage Hill Baptist Church, and the pastor resigned, not out of anything bad. It was just he was done, and so they had to bring in somebody to hold things together while they looked for another leader. And they brought in this guy named Ed Fish, I think is his name, who was an extremely competent, experienced leader who held everything together. But he was not super charismatic. He was not somebody that drew people to his personality or who he was, so that when they brought someone else in to lead the congregation, the people that were there weren't comparing the new guy to Ed, where they would have compared him to the pastor who was before. And that makes it very difficult when you have a very charismatic leader who is very loved by their community, and they leave, and then you immediately bring someone else in. Everybody's comparing them to that leader, and it makes it very difficult for that person to get any traction going along. And this happens with worship leaders and other things also, but having senior leaders that are in a position to go in and fill those places while search is had for a new leader is a very powerful thing.
So with me, it's a twofold issue in the movement. So like, for instance, we're talking, I feel like we spent the first 13 minutes talking about, and I think we should talk about those things, is the bottom-up issues from the view of the planter. So let's imagine that I go to Tennessee, or when I'm living in Tennessee, I'm just, and I plant a Messianic fellowship. As me, like Toby Manolis. Right. That's who I am. I'm not Jewish. But I still theologically sound, it's not Hebrew roots, and I want to, I think being under an umbrella is important, and being part of a greater community is important, like the Alliance, the Union. So the bottom-up issues is what you've just outlined, how difficult it just is planting. Just to quote a podcast I listened to, it says, if you want to plant a place, you have to be a little crazy, and I believe that. and you're taking risks, you're putting yourself out there, and that you being bivocational and funds and having help and all those things, and making sure you're bringing the right people in, because the wrong people come in, because anytime you create a congregation or a situation like that, there's holes to be filled, and behind those holes are vacuums, and they pull often the wrong people who just want authority and just want and just want a platform and all those things. So that's the bottom up issues that a planter has to deal with. But there's top down issues. Okay, so I don't like to use the word a carrot, but an incentive from these organizations. Now, I wasn't going to name the organizations, but Rabbi Eric kind of opened the door for that, so I'm just going to say, I have been in the ordination program in the Alliance, which is a 2-year program, and I'm going on 3. And I keep getting tabled. It's different. It's slow for whatever reason. It's a slow process to get that ordination. I'm past the pastor thing versus rabbi. I can stomach that. I don't think everybody can stomach that. I can stomach that. Okay. But there's too much wheel spinning going on in that ordination process, I think. Okay. So I'm 3 years into a 2-year program. So that I think is problematic. So if somebody told me that, if that's what I'm getting, I'm like, what's the point in me doing this? If I go to a union side, which there are things I like about the Alliance and things I like about the union, and there's things that I'm critical of both, and that's totally normal, because we've all felt that way.
Right.
With the union side of things.
Well, there's always room for improvement.
So somebody comes to me from the union. Hey, would you like to be under the union? Okay, well, I'm not Jewish. Okay, well, that's a whole other thing with the union. It's a different beast in the union being a Gentile than it is in the Alliance, in different ways. But my ordination would take longer, and I'm not even saying that that's a problem, but my real problem is this. If I don't have 10 Jewish people in my little synagogue in Tennessee, I'm not going to have a voice in the union. I'm not going to have a voice with that. And if someone told me that, hey, so how many Jewish people do you have? 1. Okay. So what do I need to do? Well, you need 10. Okay. So I don't know how to do that. I can't go out and grab them and headlock them into my congregation so I can have a voice, a vote as a delegate. So what is my incentive? Well, you can come spectate. Really? Titus wasn't a spectator. Paul said, get in there, buddy. Just like he did with Timothy. So that I have a problem with that attitude. And I think that destroys an incentive, maybe not for everybody, but for some people. And why does the church grow like crazy? Yes, there's more okay, I don't want to, that's too on the nose, and I don't want to paint with a wide brush, but because the church doesn't struggle with that kind of stigma, it doesn't wrestle with that, it's beyond egalitarian, because they're not dealing with I don't want to word this the wrong way, but they're not dealing with the Jewish identity and trying to figure out what to do with Gentiles. They're just like bring anybody in, right? There's not that issue. Like, if a Jewish pastor was in the Southern Baptist Convention, he would have a voice. Like a Gentile pastor would have. So do you understand? I think we should address the bottom-up issues of planting, but you have to understand that in the current organizations, in their current states,
right,
there's some things that stymie and I think take away incentive for a guy like me.
Yeah, and
if I may, that's the union. That is, how the union's delegate run, and so in the union, if you have 10 Jewish people in your congregation, you can be a full member and have 2 delegate votes. If you have 7 to 10, you're an associate member and you have 1 delegate vote. And it doesn't matter who that delegate vote is, if they're Jewish or Gentile, it doesn't matter. But you have to have that threshold to have voice and vote and whatever. But on the other side of things with the MJA, the truth of the matter is if you're not Jewish, you don't have a say at all. You don't have any voice.
Okay, yeah,
so when you're in the MJA side, the business meeting is you have to be Jewish to be in the business meeting to be able to have a say or a vote at all. So there's definitely...
No, and I'm glad I'm sorry.
Yeah, there's definitely problems on both sides with that. And I understand both sides 60, 70 years ago, 50, 60 years ago. I understand where it came from. The attitude was, well, this is a Jewish thing and we need to maintain that Jewish thing. And if we let this flood of Gentiles come in, it's going to change this Jewish thing.
Right.
But when we're 50, 60 years into it, and there has been this flood of Gentiles, and yet we're still what we are, then that means that the fears aren't as valid as they were and shouldn't be as much an issue today.
I just want to say one quick thing.
Go ahead.
So I wanted to thank David for clarifying that about the alliance, because that's just as bad or worse. Well, that's actually worse in some ways. And again, I love a lot of people in the alliance. That's actually worse, because at least there's a path in the union for having a voice. But personally, I think that's still a problem. It still causes wheels to spin. The problem is that I don't want to defeat the conversation. It's kind of hard to talk about that when once they get up to a certain level, they're going to start spinning.
Now, I will say, and when it comes to the alliance and their membership for speaking at the MJAA business meeting and stuff, that's for the MJAA, not the IAMCS.
Yeah, that's why I said the MJAA.
And the IMCS is the congregational and ordination part. But when we talk about it, understand that, and I'm not validating or justifying or excusing, I'm just saying the reality is that though 60 or 70 years have gone by, the reason that they look at it and say, well, the reason we're still a Jewish organization and still in that direction is because we've held the voting in the organization to Jewish people. The fear, whether founded or unfounded, is, let's say that the MJA says we're just going to let everybody vote. Everybody who wants to be a member can be a member. And then you have a whole bunch of Israel-loving Assembly of God pastors join the MJAA, and suddenly there's 20,000 Assembly of God voters and 300 or 500 MJA voters. Now the MJA is no longer the MJAA. It's the Jewish wing of the Assembly of God, and no longer validated as a Jewish organization. So I understand the fear. I think there has to be a solution apart from exactly what we have now. But I do understand, and when I say fear, the concern of if we have 100,000 Gentiles that give faithfully to the MJA and they all of a sudden vote, then suddenly everything in the dynamic of the MJA can shift dramatically, and it ceases to be the organization that it was designed to be. So I do understand the concern in what they're doing. I just don't understand. I don't know how to fix that without dealing with that concern in a way that allays that concern.
And I agree, and that's my thing. I wish I did have something that I could lay out other than, but I just look at the scripture and I look at what Paul said and I look at how Paul treated Titus versus how Paul treated Timothy, and I look at those things and I know that there's.
I really didn't mean to cut you off, but you brought up Titus and Timothy, and it made me think about there is one factor to this, using the biblical narrative, that I think is valuable in the conversation. Not necessarily that it solves any problems, but I do think it's valuable to maintain the context of is Timothy and Titus weren't organizational leaders, they were congregational leaders. And so Paul did say to Titus, get in there and do your thing, but he was leading at a congregational level. Paul wasn't saying go to Jerusalem and take over the council. He was saying don't let anybody hold you back from doing what you're supposed to do in this area. Right. So, and again, that doesn't take away from the fact that there are hurdles that need to be addressed and things like that. But that was one thing I thought about was that
I think that, for instance, in the union, and let's deal with that one first. I think there has to be a way in the union to validate a community based on the number of people, as long as the theology and doctrine is fully messianic. And therefore, you don't have to have the concerns about, is the leader, or are there 10 Jewish people? If you have 3,000 non-Jewish people and 6 Jewish people, but they're observing Shabbat, they have a liturgical service, they have Torah service, their food is kosher at the place, they meet on Saturday morning, and they agree with the statement of faith, statement of vision, to say that shouldn't have a voice, it becomes a problem. Yeah. And there's got to be some way to adjust it to where theology and doctrine is the basis for vote rather than number of Jewish people.
Yeah, because to that argument, the reality is if you've got that same congregation of 3,000 people and you've got 10 Jewish people in it, you can be a full voting member, but you're still majority Gentile.
Right.
Where's the difference?
So there has to be some way to bring that about so that it's based on, okay, you have X amount, you are a real congregation. You're not 6 people meeting in a house, a chavarah, which is nothing wrong with that, but it's not a congregation. You have your own place that you're meeting, you're regularly meeting, you keep the Moedim, you keep Shabbat, you do all the things, you're aligned with our vision statement, our statement of faith, all those things. Okay, once you reach this level of participation, you are now a member with full vote. If you're less than that, you are associate vote, and if you're less than that, you're like a chavarah or something. You're an affiliate. You're part of us, but I understand those things, and I would love to see that change to where the requirement for membership, for speaking, for having a voice. In other words, if Rabbi Toby did go to Tennessee and started a congregation there, and he had 125 people coming, but only 6 of them were Jewish, he should still be able to have a voice into, as long as his voice was aligned with the theological and the statement of faith of the organization, because the fear of the construct changing is that those things would change.
Yeah, well, because...
And so if Toby come up and said, look, we're going to do this, but we're going to start only meeting on Sunday, do Christmas and Easter, we're not going to do any of the Hebraic stuff, we're not going to do liturgy, we're going to do the old hymnal from the Baptist, then that becomes, okay, now he's no longer within the scope of what Messianic Judaism is, so he doesn't get this.
Yeah, because the way things stand now, I'm just going to be honest, the way things stand now, if I was that guy in Tennessee and someone from the union explained to me the situation, I'd say, no thank you. I'm not going to pull my congregation into something where they don't have any agency. That's wrong.
Right.
You got to do something about that. Look, either we believe that Yeshua broke down that wall of partition, or we didn't. I can't explain to, like, say a woman that had children who wants to bar mitzvah her kids. I can't say you're about to be around people who think your kids have no business doing that. I'm not going to explain that to them. As a gatekeeper and a shepherd, I'm going to be like, no, you're not going to go around that.
Right. Now, I will say in the IMCS that if you had that same scenario, you have 120 people, 6 of them are Jewish, and you join the IMCS, while you would be called Messianic pastor or Messianic congregational leader, the opportunity for you to serve in the steering committee or on those things is available. So you would have the same say as anybody else in that thing. As a matter of fact, there have been non-Jewish people that have been part of those boards. So where the MJAA is led by a group of elected individuals, so everybody doesn't have a voice. It's kind of like not a democracy, but a representative republic, where people are elected by the body to represent them, and those people. So if you're non-Jewish, you can have a voice in that, and your congregation is an equal member, regardless of whether you are Jewish or non-Jewish. But that's the voice. The voice you have is the voice you elected as a group. Whereas in the UMJC, each delegate has a voice.
Yeah.
It's not run like a republic. Each congregation sends a representative of their congregation or two representatives that speak on behalf of that congregation. So the structures are different. And in the union, it is possible for non-Jews to be on the exec committee and steering and all that too, because it's just whoever is nominated and then elected. Right.
Yeah,
right. So it's a different structure of leadership, but in the IMCS, on a congregational level, there is more of an equality for in that representation. In that way, but there's, like I said, there's things I would like to see different in both organizations, but that, like you said, that's the top down. You know, if I want it, and one of the biggest things top down we haven't even talked about, and that's that in general, if I wanted to go to Alaska and start a congregation, I would go to Alaska, start a congregation, and then if I survived for 2 years, I could apply to be a member in the organization. And at that point, they would begin to interact with the congregation and decide whether we could be a member or not. Where the way I would love to see it at some point is, okay, Toby, we're going to send you to Tennessee. We're going to we're going to come behind you and say you are a union, or you are an IMCS, or you are a whatever congregation. We're going to give you that that support, that to go in with that backing, that the gravitas of I'm part of this organization, and we're going to give advice, we're going to counsel, we're going to support in some way. You're doing this so you're not fighting the wolves by yourself for 2 years, and then if you survive in 2 years, we'll talk to you about doing it. I'd love to see it from a top down. We love you, Rabbi Jonathan. We love you, and we support what you're doing, and we're going to send you to wherever. And when you get there, you're going to be able to put on your website, this is a plant from this organization.
Yeah.
And when you go to do things, we're going to be there so you can have them call us and say, yeah, he's one of our guys, and these 100,000 people are standing with him.
So I think that especially because the movement is so young, and there are still so many people that have no clue that Messianic Judaism exists, or that the IMCS or the UMJC or Tikkun or whoever else exists. You're still in an area area of time where you're going to have independent congregations that are going to start because God put something on their heart, and they start a Messianic congregation, and then from there they then find out about the organizations and want to. So I think that there needs to be an avenue for congregations that started on their own to be connected. Right. But I agree with what Rabbi Eric's saying, and I would actually take it a step farther. I think that the organizations, the congregational rabbinic organizations, need to be intentionally training up and ordaining rabbis to be sent out to go start congregations. Not necessarily that we need to train them up and plant and raise them and then tell them where to go. But, okay, this individual, Rabbi Toby has a burden on his heart, or before becoming a rabbi, Toby has a burden on his heart to be a congregational leader, to plant a congregation. I think we need to take him, build him up, train him, equip him, prepare him, ordain him as a rabbi, and then we go, okay, now, where is it that you feel like the Lord's placed it for you to go? Okay, well, Nashville, great. Well, let's send you to Nashville, or Anchorage. Let's send you to Anchorage, or whatever. And like Rabbi was saying, with that support, with that structure, with that backing behind it, rather than what a lot of times happens is, and this is kind of in both organizations, is people will start a congregation, they'll grow, they'll develop, they'll find out about organizations, or decide finally which one they want to connect with, or whatever. They'll join the organization, and then they consider going through an ordination process and consider becoming. I think that we've been around long enough that we need to be training, building, and ordaining and sending out, not just. I mean, there needs to be that avenue for those connections for independent congregations
and
too.
I think that there's movement towards that in both organizations. I think the fact that the union is doing this this summit, this conference for leaders who desire to start congregations. I think Sam Nadler doing his thing, and I think in the IMCS they're trying to work towards having something where we raise up leaders, and mentor them, and put them in a internship kind of way. Again, unfortunately, because of limited resources and stuff, it's not going as fast as any of us, I think, would like to see it happen.
Well, I can understand limited resources. What I can't deal with is harmful attitudes and policies that I think you can have 2 steps forward and send a guy to Anchorage. You can have 2 steps forward and he builds a fellowship, and then 2 steps back when he gets to a conference. And if he's not Jewish, he runs into some issues.
Well, I can tell you why we struggle to get resources and to get to this place is one thing. Policies like Toby's talking about can definitely hamper those things. But also you have to look at, how our congregations being planted, and, what is the future that going to look like? Grassroots things only last so long as grassroots. Everything that grows starts small growing up, and it either gets bigger and begins producing fruit, or it dies. It rots and it falls apart. So you can't, part of the issue is, it seems, again, this is just me speaking in my very limited experience, part of it seems that neither of the organizations actually want to embrace top-down work. That none of them are again, there are conversations being had and some inclinations of moving in that direction, but there's no great cultural thrust of, yes, top-down has to happen. And this is the same part of the conversation we had, I think, a couple of years ago at this point about, fellowship model versus denominational model. There is almost no movement that lasts longer than a handful of years in the grassroots stage. It must, at some point, gain top-down influence. That's money, that's supplies, that's training, that's people. This is the whole, this is how, since the Second World War, we and other nations have influenced other nations. It's top-down. Okay, cool. There's a grassroots pro-democracy movement in country A. So, and they've been around a couple of years. So what do? We send, operatives and agents and representatives and money and supplies and things too. And we create a top-down environment, because grassroots stuff just doesn't last long unless it embraces, grass dries up and withers and fades at the slightest hint of weather change, like significant weather change. So until you become a tree, you will get blown over. You'll dry up and burn with the rest of the chaff, unless you actually embrace the thickening, the broadening, the stretching, the deepening of the roots, the producing and dropping of fruit, allowing that fruit to ferment and to decompose and to really root in the ground. So there has to be an attitude and a cultural shift,
right?
And we, like with the educational stuff, it no longer the idea of just like, when you're ready to get through classes or educated, come to us. It has to shift. You have to go, nope, we're training up 10 rabbis this year, and we are, and I would say, honestly, part of the top-down cultural shift is letting people know that, when you embrace ministry and, coming into a movement that is really working to grow, there's a little bit of self-autonomy that gets lost in that. It just has to. That's just, it's not so you may get told you're going to go here. Now you're going to be paid and taken care of, and you'll have a place to live, but you're going to go here for 3 years, and we're going to pay for your school. You're going to be ordained, and you're going to go live here for 3 years. And after that, we'll talk. But until then, that's your job. That's what you're assigned to do.
And another thing going along with what Rabbi Jonathan was just saying is that there is an amount of cost and suffering and struggle that needs to be taken on in order to grow. In other words, if When I ran my business and it was just me, I made a certain amount of money, did a certain amount of work, but I was limited. I could only do what I could do. And I knew when I hired somebody, that meant I was going to make less for a period of time, because I had to invest in hiring someone and all that came with that. Now, I knew when I hired the second person, I still wasn't going to make any more money, because in reality, until you hire the third person, you aren't actually producing enough that the hirer, the person that owns the company, is actually going to make any money. It takes that, but it takes the willingness to say, this is going to cost my business, this is going to cost my congregation something, it's going to cost our organization something. We're going to have to bite the bullet and be willing to invest in this, because it's the only way we're going to get to the next stage, the next level. And so when I understand that very many of the congregations in both organizations are smaller, struggling, trying to keep the roof on and the power bill paid and the rabbi. But if we don't, as organizations, decide that it's worth the investment to get to the next level, and know that it's going to cost, that means I may not be able to do something that I wanted to do at my congregation this year in order to give for somewhere else. And the realization that souls in places where there aren't a congregation are worthy of the investment, and doing that, and those bullets we have to take sometimes to do that are worth the pain in a couple of years. Once we get past that initial investment, then it becomes self-sustaining and grows. And so you have 100 congregations now, and they each invest a little bit. Then now you have 120 congregations giving into the pot to help with that, and then 150, and then 200, and then you aren't. But during that growth, you see more growth. And I know from experience, and then I'll let you say what you want to say. When we started other congregations out of our congregation, like we were in Mobile, and then we started congregation in Pensacola, and one in Slidell, and one in Foley. Each time we started a new congregation, it made our congregation smaller, and it cost money from our congregation to do that. But it wasn't very long before the growth of our congregation, because it was pruned, outgrew what we gave by starting the other ones, and those congregations grew and went on.
So small scale.
Yeah, and that's small. But the reality is that yes, it's going to be painful initially to actually make the top-down change, to start and invest into young leaders, young congregations, things. But when those congregations mature, it will produce more fruit.
Yeah, and maybe an example will help, because we can talk about it making it painful, and then it just, what has to be painful? Because the truth is, and we were just talking about this before we started the show, the movement really does kind of walk on the edge of a knife right now, and there are a handful of older, wiser leaders who recognize that. They see, they see on the one side, beautiful, fruitful growth, and on the other side, just an abyss of nothingness. Is the future if certain things don't change. And what's painful? Okay, here's what's painful. Taking all of the attention and focus that we give to things like the Joseph Project and pouring all of that into congregational development and growth. I love the Joseph Project. Me and my wife have given to the Joseph Project. We think it's a wonderful thing for Israel. I think, though, when it comes to things like, for example, the big pusher for the Joseph Project is the MJAA, Alliance of America. And, they're how about this? There won't be an Alliance for America in 20 years if things don't change. there has to be a change. There has to be a shift in focus of finance and energy into developing leaders and planting congregations. No longer can we rely on grassroots stuff, because most of the grassroots stuff, about half of them don't join you anyway. So that means they don't fiscally support your positions and stuff anyway. And then a lot of them actually end up getting kind of folded into local churches anyway, as just sort of a, we talk about, that there is this fear that the Messianic Jewish movement will just become a wing of one of the one or more Protestant groups, whether it's Assemblies of God or Southern Baptist Association or whatever. That is going to be the future if there is not a huge shift in direction and energy. Because
it won't even just be becoming a wing of it. It'll just be everybody migrates to a church.
Right, exactly.
Or God will just do something else apart from those organizations, which I personally lean
and
towards
there's, because I've been to multiple conferences over the last, going on 5 years now. And, the biggest takeaways, like the highlight points of the conferences, at least, and again, I've only really been to the MJA conferences, haven't been to a Union one yet, is the worship, the Torah service on Shabbat morning. That's a highlight. And then, because it's talked about pretty much every gathering point, Joseph Project. I'm like, man, what if we just shared one of those speaking things, one of those 30-40 minute periods where we talk about Joseph Project? What if we had videos and speeches and an offering, God forbid, an offering passed and taken up for mission planting, for planting and supporting Messianic? Go plant a couple folks that are supported and bring them to the conferences and be like, tell us,
this is what you've done.
Tell us what you're doing in the boroughs of New York, ministering and evangelizing the Jewish community and having a thriving Messianic Jewish community with tons of Orthodox Jewish converts who, for generations have been Orthodox Jews and are now Messianic believers. Like, think of the energy that would bring, to think of the additional church support that would bring when they look and they see, oh my gosh, the MJA, the IMCS, they're actually doing the calling of what they want to do, which is to bring Messiah to the Jewish world. And think about how much more. And again, you only have to be like, okay, let's sit down and draft a plan for 3 years. Half of the energy, devotion to Joseph Project is going towards planting. Just half, not even all of it. For 3 years. And then see what the fruits of that bring about.
Right. And I think that, honestly, and this isn't bashing the Joseph Project in any way.
I love the Joseph Project.
But I think that the result of focusing on building congregations and communities and strengthening congregation communities in the U.S. would actually result in larger donations to the Joseph Project, because there would be more people to give. There'd be more bodies that were being touched by the MJAA, by what was going on in the U.S., because the truth is still just short of half of the Jews in the world live in the USA. There's still unreached people in the USA that need to hear the message of Yeshua. And by focusing, even like Rabbi Jonathan said, if they took one of those times during a service and brought in people and said, these are just a handful of the people that we have supported, that we've helped, that we've given money to, and here's what God has done through their ministries, and this year we want to add 10 more.
And emphasis, same energy. So, when I go to a conference and I get 2 or 3 videos, different ones from the Joseph Project, and I get to see trucks driving around Israel bringing supplies to soldiers defending the country, to women, to single mothers and children in need, to people who need dental work. I want to see a video with equal production value. And of people who are living in other places in the U.S., filming immersions, filming people, worshiping, interviewing, people who are like, yeah, last year I was an atheist, I'm Jewish, but I was an atheist. My I grew up in a Jewish household. I became an atheist in high school or college, whatever. Mm-hmm. And now I'm a believer in Yeshua, and here's my testimony. Because that. And again, I can't say this enough. I love the Joseph Project. I love what it does. But in order for my, and I've had this conversation with my wife, in order for our son to have a Joseph Project to give to one day when he's my age, there has to be
growth
an equal
in the
push.
Body of Messiah.
There has to be an equal push for growth, for planting congregations, for training, educating, and developing leaders, an equal amount as the Joseph Project. Because there will not be a Joseph Project in 30 years if that doesn't happen.
Yeah, and you can't. Again, you just can't. And I like everything Jonathan said. 100% agree. By the way, and I just don't think we can get to that point though until everybody involved, no matter who they are, Jew or Gentile, knows, not feels, because feelings, knows that they have a stake in this. And knows that they're equally valued by those organizations, knows that, and doesn't go and feel a disparity in that. You can't look. It doesn't even work in the world, guys. Forget the Bible. It doesn't. It wouldn't work in the world to expect the world from one person and they get rewarded and get felt like they're valued, and expect the world from somebody else. And when they get there, well, no, you just go sit over there. But we still want the same stuff from you as we're expecting from this one.
Well, I'll tell you where it does work in the world, when organizations are actually effective at what they're trying to do.
Yeah, and it's just everybody feels like they have a stake.
Right.
And everybody feels equally valued. I'm saying that's not happening right now. Look, people say the wrong quiet parts out loud in situations like this. We should be saying the right quiet parts out loud about this stuff. It's not going to work if that's going to continue. It just won't happen. We can just talk about how great it would be if we can continue, if the Messianic movement would just erupt. But as long as that pervasive attitude is still there and people are talking about the color of the movement and stuff like that, man, it's going to defeat that. It's like it's going to be like two equal forces pushing.
Right, and that's why, and I agree absolutely, which is why we were talking earlier as part of this discussion is how do we change the culture to where people who are called, like you, like Rabbi Jonathan, who are called from the nations to be a part of this and aren't treated, or at least appear to be treated, as a second tier or a lesser than person. The movement works when we understand that 10 people from the nations are going to grab the tzitzit of the Jew and say, I want what you've got. And if they're not valued, if we go, well, you can have some of what I got. You can have a little of what I got. Or you can have the crumbs from the table that fall off from what I've got. Then we have a problem. And all of this is a holistic thing that we need to figure out, how do we, without changing the nature of the unity of Jew and non-Jew,
right?
In the way that it should be. How do we, without changing that, bring about an equality of who we are without losing the distinctions?
Yeah.
Or focusing so much on the distinctions that we lose the equality.
Yeah, and the hardest part of it is, and I think this is the ultimate reality, the hardest part is that you can't fix a problem from the outside, right? You have to be on the inside to be a part of the solution. But being on the inside sometimes can be so complicated that you just don't want to be there. And so you got to figure out how to walk that plank with balance, where you're not letting the anger, the wounds, the pains, and all of that become your entire personality, and are able to still influence and such from inside. The other alternative outside of that is just to leave altogether and completely start fresh from scratch with something entirely new. And I don't know which is the
Yeah, and a big part of this, in my opinion, is that the pioneers that did what had to happen to get where we are today, to get them to look and see broader than pioneering to building to making a city to going beyond, and seeing that there is more, to get them to change their mindset, not giving up on their vision or direction, but being broader minded to say we can do more, we can be more if we just let loose of some of these reins and allow the horses to run where they will under the guidance of the Holy Spirit, of the Ruach.
And I think that part of the complexity of changing things from the inside is trying to figure out what can be changed and what's just rotten and needs to be thrown out, because you can't change something that's rotten.
Absolutely.
Well, and that's part of changing, is getting rid of what's dead and not helping.
Right. And I think we touched on some of that today. That's good.
Yeah, and the reality, and that goes back to what I was saying, is like, if, like in a restaurant, you can't take the trash out, the spoiled stuff. You can't take the trash out if you're not an employee there. Right, you kind of have to be in the mix to realize, something's bad.
I mean, you can, but then the cops get called,
but then there's problems.
It gets awkward.
But you like, if you're just a customer in there, you can go, hey, something smells foul, right? But if the employees don't go and take care of it, if the people that are responsible don't, nothing changes. But when you're part of the staff and you realize, hey, something's not right, and you work, but otherwise, if you're on the outside going, something's not right, you're just wagging fingers at people and not getting anywhere.
Every time we invite somebody to come to our congregation, or a leader from somewhere else comes and visits our congregation, I ask them the same question. And the reason I ask this question is because when you're where you are, you don't always see everything. But I always ask, best thing, worst thing. If you were going to add something to your ministry, and we did something so well that you said this is something we need to do everywhere, what would it be? And worst thing, if there was something that you think we should never do again, we should change immediately. Because as a leader going through our service and doing what we're doing, I'm so busy operating that I don't always see everything. So sometimes as a leader, you have to look at people who aren't necessarily in the committee, in the thing, and say, okay, best thing, worst thing. What's the best thing that happens at our conference? And what if we had a conference and there was one thing you could tell us, never do this again, what would it be?
I think the kids' Bible verses probably gets the most positive feedback.
Yeah, at our synagogue is the kids and the things we do with that. But the same thing needs to be organizationally. What works really well? What did we do so good? And you have to ask people that aren't in your sounding board group that you talk to all the time. The people that have been there over and over and over, because they're not going to see it. It has to be open to people whose voices...
We asked the same question in our membership interview when people are going, entering into membership at CMC. We're like, okay, we asked 2 questions. Nobody's allowed to cop out on it. What do you like best about the congregation, and what do you like least about it? We tell them, look, it helps us see what we're doing well and maybe what we're not doing well. Areas that either we need to change or you need to change on.
Right, and understand that when I ask that question of somebody, they might say, well, I think the worst thing you do is this. And I look at it and say, well, I understand you might not like that.
Yeah.
But we do.
Yeah.
And it is effective for us. Yeah. You just don't see the effectiveness.
Yeah, the opinion doesn't guarantee the change, but it helps the opinion with the evaluation.
But it does help evaluation.
Yeah.
And I think both organizations, I hope that leaders of it listen to this podcast and other ones like this, and they hear a voice that says, hey, what we're doing has been great. We've done good things, but there are things that we've done that are excellent that we need to continue doing. And there's things we could change to advance and be better. And you can listen to what we say and say, you know what, I think it's all bunk. I don't think they said anything of value. I just throw it all away. Or you can say, hey, I think what they said might be of value. Maybe we need to get a group of people together and say, okay, evaluate this last conference or evaluate this last thing and tell us what the best thing and the worst thing was, and then make adjustments. Maybe we are at a place where we're no longer this small grassroots thing, as Rabbi Jonathan said, and maybe it's time for us to make the next change, even if that's going to cost us money, time, energy, and affect how we're doing other things.
Everything worth doing will cost you.
Mm-hmm. Right.
When I go to the gym, I lose $27 a month, and it hurts, but it's worth it. And that's just that's the reality of life. And if you can't see that, then you probably ought not be in leadership. I think one of the biggest ways we can help our people to help afford change, as they go to conferences, as we encourage them to go to conferences and to be active participants in both organizations as congregational members. I think maybe something we could even adopt in the future, as something I've thought about. But like have a once a year congregational, just a business meeting. Be like, here's what they do. Here's what's happened over the last year. We just want you to be informed. Here's some nosh, some light snacks, and we're just going to go through what the organizations that we're a part of, because we're a part of both. What the organizations have been doing this year, et cetera, et cetera. How do you think this could be improved?
Yeah. And I can't say enough about the fact that both organizations, after their conferences, after their gatherings, send out a survey and be honest on the survey.
Oh, yeah.
I think we did this, but this needs to change, because at least you're speaking into it and going from there.
Because we've seen those things change. Like I know enough people complained about the some of the timing of certain things enough that it changed. It did change. So which is a good thing, and good on them for changing. When needed to be changed.
Anyhow, we veered a little from our topic, but I hope this has been helpful, and I hope that this will encourage people, both in leadership of organizations and those that are looking for opportunities, in that there is opportunity, that there are ways to do this, that you can do it, and that although right now it may be costly, it may be hard, that if we can adjust, if we can grow, if we can move, if we can make it easier on those who are starting new congregations, and be supportive of them in doing so. And the result of that will be growth and expansion, which will then provide resources which will make it easier for everybody.
And a lasting legacy.
Right.
Like your name will be associated with, they champion the growth of Messianic Judaism, rather than it died at the hands and at the feet of so-and-so.
Yeah, so if you have comments about this topic or thoughts, please share it on whichever format that you're looking at, Facebook or on the listening service that you're using. If you have a question or something you'd like us to talk about in a further episode, just let us know in the same way, and we will see you next week.
Thank you for listening to the Messiantics podcast. Make sure to subscribe so you can be notified every time we drop a new episode. And be sure to follow and interact with us on social media at Messiantics Podcast.